Welcome, everyone. It's good to be back here after a 2-month hiatus, and yeah, I hope everyone has been well. I hope that practice has been progressing for your own sake and for everyone around you. So it's good that we can meet here and do something very virtuous, keeping in mind that we're doing this for the very reason that suffering is not unique to us, but to the entire nature of our reality. That being the deluded reality from which we are seeking refuge, and that's then the present chapter. I'll just briefly reiterate some of the things that have been spoken about in this chapter, taking refuge. Of course, at this point, we've gone over the various reflections that are basic to taking refuge in terms of understanding our unique opportunity as being born as humans, understanding the brevity of this situation, the consequences of samsara, the nature of samsara, and generating the wish to extract ourselves. We do so on the basis of 3 kinds of fears. And it's very important for the modern person to realize we take refuge out of fear. Because so very often the modern spiritual quest is slightly tinged with, if not sort of a narcissistic agenda of self-improvement, then certainly a wish to just be comfortable. And that's where, and very much for one's own sake. And that doesn't necessarily challenge the entire nature of our understanding of reality. It's really just within our reality, which is a given to be in a particular way, we could be more comfortable. And that's where the Buddha's enlightenment is very important to us, because that's where finally reality was understood completely. And that's where we understand reality as experience. And this experience presently, in our case, is constructed by profoundly confused subjectivity, profoundly confused consciousness. And that's why it's all very good to sort of talk about the nature of consciousness, but as long as we're not actually privy and haven't realized the nature of consciousness, then we spin off into suffering and are continually, despite our wish to be happy, continually we're generating our own suffering. So that's where the initial inspiration in taking refuge is one of fear. And that's where for the ordinary individual taking refuge, we would say it is the fear of the lower realms. The Bodhisattva, very interestingly, takes refuge not so much out of fear of samsara, but rather out of fear of nirvana, understanding how an individual could very well simply abandon others. And that's what the Bodhisattva really fears, fearing the self-centered agenda, even though it might be the complete elimination of personal suffering. If it's done without the concern for others, that's what the Bodhisattva fears, that you'd actually be completely content to be okay, even though the rest of the world is suffering. And that's what the Bodhisattva fears. The Vajrayanist, the Vajrayana yogi, the Vidyadhara, fears falling into delusion. There's not really any fear of samsara, there's not really any fear of nirvana, there's simply just fear of this falling into, gullibly grasping onto the reality of our projected phenomena and not seeing the purity of the nature of reality, not seeing the purity of one's own consciousness. And that's where the Vajrayana person is someone who understands that intrinsically reality is pure. We're not talking about, as I always have to stress, we're not talking about all of a sudden forgetting that sentient beings are suffering. But For the Vajrayana practitioner, it's important to no longer be held by this ordinary dualistic confusion that projects confusion and projects solidity, projects essentially the deluded understanding of our world and a deluded understanding of ourselves. And that's where the Vajrayana practitioner continually sustains this non-deluded vision. If we're talking about the Mahayoga or the development stage level of Vajrayana, yes, that uses the concepts of developing the notion of deity, mandala, and so forth, pure perception. But that's really just to sustain the nature of reality, which is then completely integrated at the level of the completion stage, or the practices of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which is entirely without any concepts. But the fundamental fear then for the Vajrayana practitioner is failing to see the purity. So that's why we would say there's the Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana level of taking refuge. So what constitutes a true refuge is then someone who can be the guide, who can provide, that's the Buddha, who can provide clear teaching, instruction on how to extract oneself from this confusion. And those that then become an inspiration as one practices the path, one's companions. And that's where we understand the faith as completely relying on somebody that possesses all the qualities of awakening. And that's where we talk about the faith, that even though we are confused individuals, we see someone who has purity which reflects our own purity, that we can actually see the quality in the Buddha, or see the quality of the teacher, is of course because we have this potential within ourselves. And that process is signified, or is known in terms of 4 stages of faith, which is then the initial vivid faith, where we see someone possessing these qualities and thinks, wow, this is really somebody who has understood, not just cerebrally, not a lecturer who can stand and expound, some brilliant thought, in a university or at a TED talk or something, not just somebody who has great ideas, but someone we can see who has perfected really the meaning of our reality, of life, if you like. Someone who has brought forth everything that we like about life, everything that we intuitively appreciate about existence, and seeing that. And then we have this yearning that we'd like to do this for ourselves. It's not just that we're objectifying this on some idol, but there's also the sense, I can do this, I should do this. And that's where we engage in the path. And from there, then we gain confident faith, that when we begin to see this actually work in terms of our own experience, and that brings us to what we call irreversible faith, when there's absolutely no doubt about what it is that we're doing in terms of the path. But this then all is premised on recognizing the qualities of the refuge, namely then the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And presently then, and this is where we've gotten to in the discussion, we're looking at the qualities of the Buddha. And the Buddha's qualities is understood in terms of 2 aspects, what we call elimination and realization. And so that's where we understand the Buddha's, what the Buddha does is not build up some great phenomenal spirituality, but the Buddha is simply someone who has uncovered the reality of who we are. And so that's where the Buddha is not enlightened because the Buddha has gone higher and higher and higher, but simply because the Buddha knows reality for what it is. The veils have been eliminated. And when we describe this in terms of the path, we particularly describe this in terms of the process that takes place once somebody truly sees reality. And that's then on the basis of eliminating delusion, then there occurs not something that is constructed, but rather realization of what was always there. So we know the Buddha in terms of the qualities of elimination, what the path has brought in terms of eliminating obscurations, and then after that, the realization of what was always there. So the Buddha is someone who's realized what is reality, who we are. And so elimination then has been described here in this work, and I have to say, as possibly you remember, this is an area that I'm not particularly expert in. There's an enumeration of the 112 or 414 qualities of elimination. And so I'd like to make the disclaimer that I can read through this text, and let's read through this text together, but I'm not sure I can give a lot of meaningful commentary on this. I might consult the footnotes. Basically just reading through this subject matter. Now, so that's where we're looking at the qualities of the Buddhas, qualities of elimination. And that's where essentially we're looking at, in terms of the 5 paths, the path of accumulation, the path of joining, the path of seeing, and the path of meditation. Mainly these qualities of elimination are understood in terms of the path of seeing and the path of meditation. And again, as we shall see here now, there's a slight difference between the way the Hinayana sees this and the Mahayana sees this. And again, disclaimer, very important point, when we talk about Hinayana, it's a Mahayana expression. It is not a particular tradition out there. I'm sorry I've said this so many times, but it's very important in terms of these days where Buddhism is global. We're not relegated to individual little, you could say, kingdoms or regions in which Buddhism has flourished. And it's very important that Hinayana is not understood as being, those people out there. Hinayana is a doctrinal term that is very important in the Mahayana. So we can't all of a sudden refer to Mahayana term, Hinayana, and all of a sudden give it the name of some living tradition. That wouldn't be fair. The Hinayana refers to particular doctrines that are understood in the Mahayana, you could say, vision of how we gradually progress along the path. And Trungpa Rinpoche, for example, will always emphasize how Hinayana is basic to our initial organic development. So we begin with just focusing on ourselves, taking responsibility for our confusion, and also seeing our potential where we gradually evolve into Mahayana individuals. But this is an individual organic development that takes place. And that's where the term Hinayana and Mahayana is very valuable in terms of us identifying the process of the gradual path. But that's where then but it is slightly confusing because sometimes, yes, there is reference to some traditions as being Hinayana, some traditions as being Mahayana. But for our peace of mind, and particularly in the modern context, trying to see Hinayana as a doctrinal term and not a reference to a particular tradition is very helpful. And it certainly is a very prominent term and a very prominent way of classifying the teachings within the Mahayana model. So we're presently then at this chapter, this section that's called the Hinayana and Mahayana ways of removing the obscurations by seeing. So this is the path of seeing. So Kangyur Rinpoche, commenting on Jigme Lingpa, says, taken all together, the path of seeing comprises 16 instants, 4 for each of the 4 truths. They are called acceptance, understanding, subsequent acceptance, and subsequent understanding. So when we have the 4 truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path, each of these can be divided into these 4: acceptance, understanding, subsequent acceptance, and subsequent understanding. Kangyur Rinpoche writes, the realization of the truth of suffering thus comprises 4 instants. At the first instant, when there occurs a fearless acceptance of the nature of suffering, 10 obscurations, at the first instance, when there occurs a fearless acceptance of the nature of suffering, 10 obscurations eliminated by seeing, related to the truth of suffering of the desire realm, are eliminated. They are discarded. At the second instant, there occurs an understanding of the nature of suffering, and here wisdom arises as the antidote. At the third moment, that of subsequent acceptance, 18 obscurations eliminated by seeing, related to the truth of suffering of the form and formless realms, are discarded. At the fourth moment, that of subsequent understanding, the wisdom again arises as the antidote. If these same 4 moments are applied to the other 3 truths, we have altogether 4 groups of 28 obscurations. Thus, we arrive once again at a total of 112 eliminated obscurations. Again, I'd like to emphasize really to just let this wash. If you're familiar with this, this is great. Then it sort of just reiterates what you already know. But if you are not familiar with these terms, then just let it wash over you. And like I was saying earlier, this is not something that I'm very at home with. So it would be silly of me to try to pretend to elaborate on this. So basically what we're doing here right now is reading the text, but please do not be, you could say, discouraged or turned off and thinking, oh, this is so complex, not relevant to me. It is relevant, but it is just as when we, for example, if we, let's say for the first time buy a car, there might be all sorts of information related to the car, but since we haven't used the car yet, it might seem superfluous, unnecessary. We just want to put the key in the ignition and drive. But it's worthwhile, you could say, being exposed to all this information and also to appreciate really the depth and complexity and the profundity of the teaching. So please hang in there while I just read the text. Kangyur Rinpoche writes, the Mahayana teaches, on the other hand, that the obscurations eliminated by seeing that are related to the 3 realms, desire, form, and formless, are abandoned totally, all at the same time. It is believed that they are abandoned at the very moment when the nature of each of the 4 truths is understood. The 18 Shravaka schools of Hinayana Buddhism are said to have explained the 16 instances of the path of seeing in many different ways. And in the Mahayana also, the master Haribhadra says that there are 2 distinct ways of setting them forth. First, it is said that with regards to the moments of discernment, these 16 instants arise successively, while from the point of view of the moment of absolute reality, these 16 are but one single instant. Second, there is the opinion of those who believe that an instant of discernment and an instant of absolute reality are in fact a single instant. Okay, let's see what, that sounds appealing, right? Let's see what the footnote says. The term instant may be understood in 2 senses. It may refer to the smallest unit of time, dute kechik, or to the period of time required for the accomplishment of a given action, jawa zope kechik. The later is necessarily variable. It may correspond to something as brief as a finger snap, or it may encompass the period extending from the first generation of bodhicitta to full attainment of enlightenment. In the Drupte, the Omniscient, this is the treasury of the precious treasury of, I think it's called scripture, actually, in Richard Barron's translation. The Omniscient Longchenpa says that the 4 truths are realized in 16 instants of the second kind, so something that progresses, or rather is completed over time, of varying lengths. In this context, instants of discernment, sosotope kechik, are the instants necessary for the cognition of each of the 16 aspects of the 4 truths. The instant of absolute reality, dekonaniki kechik, is the moment in which absolute reality is realized. So basically, the first is one that's progressive, and the final, the seeing of the instant of absolute reality, is of course where the notion of past, present, future, and so forth fall away, and that's where then, from that perspective, from the absolute perspective, the constructions of time fall away, and hence the perspective is very different from one of the gradual approach. Anyway, so that's where essentially this particular approach to these moments of illumination, they are understood to be accomplished in a single instant. Haribhadra himself adopts the first alternative, that the 16 instants arise successively. It is impossible for one so-called instant of discernment to destroy all misconceptions concerning the Four Truths. Therefore, taking each of the four of the truths into consideration, the gradual eradication of misconception passes through 16 instants. Nevertheless, the so-called instant of absolute reality is regarded as the single instant in which the absence of self is seen directly. It is a single instant because the ultimate nature cannot be divided into a succession of categories, so that we can understand. As long as there's a gradual process, then there will be divisions. At the ultimate, of course, any notion of process becomes irrelevant. In one of his writings, the Noble Asanga explains the 16 instants of the Four Truths as follows. First, at the time of acceptance of the knowledge of the nature of suffering, everything eliminated by seeing falls away. At the moment of understanding the nature of suffering, the wisdom antidote arises. Through subsequent acceptance, an understanding dawns that the wisdom of accepting and the wisdom of understanding the nature of suffering constitute the ground of the noble path of meditation. Through subsequent understanding, there is the realization that subsequent acceptance is the ground of the noble path. Acceptance and understanding of the nature of the Four Truths pertain more to the object apprehended, namely the truths themselves. By contrast, subsequent acceptance and subsequent understanding refer to the wisdom, namely the apprehending agent in the inquiry. In Asanga's tradition, the system of 16 instants is drawn up to describe how incontrovertible knowledge is achieved in post-meditation period. This is regarded as a scholastic classification for the sake of those inclined to an intellectual approach. On the other hand, from the point of view of the state beyond all conceptual constructions, as experience in meditation, these 16 instants occur at once. The Master Nagarjuna likewise says in his writings that the system of 16 instants is merely an analytical procedure describing the destruction of misconceptions of the Four Truths. Acceptance arises in a confidence in the Four Truths that bestows a fearless assent, and through understanding their nature, one realizes them directly. Through subsequent acceptance, fearlessness regarding the nature of the Four Truths is obtained, even during post-meditation. Finally, through subsequent understanding, a perfect knowledge of the Four Truths arises even in the post-meditation state. It is in this context that the division into 16 instants is made. In point of fact, however, the instant in which one sees all phenomena as unborn and beyond all conceptual construct is indivisible into 16. So again, please keep in mind that what we're talking about here are, of course, divisions that are relevant in terms of identifying and analyzing a process, but ultimately this process is something that exists at the level of ordinary, you could say, conceptual or psychological experience, phenomenology. And as such, then, this is something which in the absolute doesn't have any reality. And that's where we are referring then to how in the state of meditation, in dwelling, free from any such, you could say, phenomena or conceptual constructs, and that there is no such, that these constructs, they're how do you say, they don't apply. So there's not any sense of these being anything particular. So that's where we understand that all of this takes place within the, you could say, relative gradual approach. As it is said in the Lankavatara Sutra, the unborn nature is the only truth, while Four Truths is the talk of mere children. For those abiding in the essence of enlightenment, not one is found. Why speak of four? And that's where we need to identify the difference between absolute truth and relative truth. And that, of course, is also what really defines the view of the Mahayana, that we can distinguish between these two realities and understand that for ordinary individuals like myself, The Four Noble Truths apply. For sublime beings, doesn't apply. There's no suffering to begin with. And yet, also understanding the nature of the path is aligning ourselves with what is real, not perpetuating what is unreal. And that's where it's also important for us to have some inkling and some vision of the absolute, even though we presently need to relate to the experience of the relative. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, in conclusion, therefore, these 16 instants are merely a schematic description of a single meditative instant. So again, all of this is subsumed within alignment with the absolute, which is then the meditative condition. Can you please explain what kind of wisdom is involved in this text here? Well, the wisdom that we speak about in Buddhism is the wisdom of vipassana. It's the wisdom that we arrive at when we relinquish our confusion. So that's where all along the path, as we engage in removing ourselves from confusion, extracting ourselves from confusion, heading toward lack of confusion, we apply the methodology of meditation. And meditation is not just the calm sitting, but it's combining the calm sitting with a freedom from the ordinary preoccupation with our thinking, with our ideas, our assumptions. And that's where then, on the basis of freeing ourselves from these assumptions, these projections, then we begin to see more and more without this superimposing, without this interference from our own belief systems, our own habitual patterns, and all our obscurations. And that is what we're describing here. What defines the Buddha is someone who has then eliminated these obscurations. So that's where the path of seeing really is what takes us to see the absolute nature. And that is then the wisdom that we are applying here. So now then, having seen that, then we talk about how obscurations are eliminated on the path of meditation. So the path of seeing is actually seeing clearly, but the path of meditation is then proceeding. We would say that the path of seeing eliminates a lot of obscurations, but we still need to remove the habitual patterns that are associated with this confusion. If we would say you have a bottle of perfume, you pour out the perfume, and that's what the path of seeing does. The majority of obscurations are dealt with to a large extent, pouring out the perfume, but the bottle will still smell of perfume, and that's then where we need to have the elimination of these obscurations on the basis of the path of meditation. So that's where here then Kangyur Rinpoche, in the section, how the obscurations are eliminated on the path of meditation, he then writes, turning now to the obscurations eliminated by meditation. It is said that through familiarity with the practice, the antidotes to these obscurations, which in fact constitute the path of meditation itself, will gradually develop, beginning from the most general and progressing to the most penetrating. As a result, the obscurations will disappear in the same order, starting from the most gross and proceeding to the most subtle. As we have said, the obscurations eliminated by seeing are imputed misconceptions, whereas the meditations eliminated by meditation are. So this is important here again, like I was just speaking about. The obscurations eliminated by seeing are imputed misconceptions. That's the basics of we see the hoax of our confusion. Whereas the obscurations eliminated by meditation, they are innate thought patterns. So they're much deeper. And that's where one thing is that we sort of see the snake as a rope, but there's still very deep, you could say, habits that continually bring us back to this delusion that continually we fall back into, taking self, taking the phenomenal world for real. So that's why we can establish and we can even achieve an insight at the level of seeing, but the habits are still run very deep. Kangyur Rinpoche writes, imputation refers to the view of the transitory composite, the belief in an I. So that's where we can see how the 5 skandhas, they are constructed as self in various ways. So that's what we call, even though we can see skandhas are ever changing, and yet we impute the self onto these skandhas. And that's what then constitutes the belief in an I. And so that's imputation refers to that. It also refers to the extreme views of eternalism, the belief in things having some absolute identity, or nihilism, completely refusing to go beyond just the appearances of things, simply just saying there's just what I can see here, there's nothing else. So, and so forth. They are the conceptions imputed newly in each existence under the influence of mistaken theories. So that's where the imputation refers to these views that we, you could say, assimilate through our education, through our culture, through our immersion into a particular discourse, that we essentially, it's added to us. This stands in opposition to, you could say, a very fundamental level of you could say, ignorance. Kangyur Rinpoche says, people who take up a philosophical position maintain these false theories open. On the other hand, even those who are innocent of philosophy are nevertheless always liable to entertain such mistaken views. So you might not be a philosopher or a scientist, but you probably still think, oh yeah, there's a real world out there. There's a real self, there's a real mind, there's a real emotion, there's a real psychology, there's a real person, there's a real character. All of that, this happens even though we are not involved in philosophy or analysis, we all have that. Or ordinary beings have it, put it that way. The expression innate thought patterns refers, by contrast, to the fact that the mind is already configured in a self-oriented way. So we have on one hand that which is acquired, you could say, culturally, and then there's that which remains innate to our samsaric condition of ignorance. So that's where the mind is configured, essentially operates from the point of view of self, and that we have, sorry to say, even innocent babies are not tabula rasa. Even little babies have their little wants and little thises and preferences and so forth. And in fact, even though you could say the motoric skills are not fully developed from previous lives, they bring into this life plenty of conditioning that is all about the self. Kangyur Rinpoche says, this configuration which thinks I am is accompanied by desire and other afflictive thought patterns which turn outward toward objects. The mind has been oriented in this way from beginningless time. Thus, the obscurations eliminated by seeing run counter to the nature of the Four Truths. The obscurations eliminated by meditation run counter to the sense objects such as form and so on. Even though the obscurations of strong anger is completely eliminated only on the path of meditation, it is already attenuated by the powerful sun of wisdom arising on the path of seeing, which withers it like a rotting shoot. This is why it is said that the Aryas are free from such afflictions once they have attained the noble path. That's on the basis of the path of seeing, even though these same afflictions are said to be fully eliminated only on the path of meditation. So Aryas here refer to sublime persons who no longer are fooled by appearances, but yet who still have a path in terms of eliminating, you could say, deep-rooted habitual patterns. The obscurations eliminated by seeing are the misconceptions newly imputed in every lifetime under the influence of false tenet systems. This is why non-Buddhist tenets are unable to influence someone in whom the path of seeing has arisen, and this will remain true throughout all subsequent lives. So that's where somebody who has achieved the level of seeing are no longer sort of believe in these false tenet systems, the belief systems that you could say unenlightened persons would proclaim, such as the belief in a solid matter, the belief in a solid subjective, or even just saying, oh, there's nothing beyond what we can see. These extremes are what we call eternalism and nihilism. Okay, how can we apply seeing and meditation to combat our deep-rooted patterns, such as jealousy and lack of self-esteem? Well, how can we apply? Well, this is what we're doing with the path. When we're talking about the path of seeing and the path of meditation, we're talking about quite advanced levels. And we're describing these in terms of what signifies or what is the Buddha. So what are the qualities of Buddha? And that's why we're talking about, you could say, a sublime or supreme degree of spirituality. And that's why we take refuge in the Buddha, why we look to the Buddha. But of course, us on the path, we also are faced with the very same challenges that the Aryas they eliminate through these paths of seeing and meditation. So it's true, we already at our level, these challenges apply. But that is where you could say our journey is not exactly defined in terms of the path of seeing, the path of meditation, but is more applied in terms of us on what we call the path of accumulation and the path of joining, which is where we then need to engage in what we call the three trainings, which of course also applies to the Aryas, but for us then it applies particularly establishing the foundations of the spiritual path in terms of what we call Shila, or ethics or lifestyle discipline, and then engaging with meditation, the practice of the path, whatever our teacher instructs us to. And on the basis of that, then gradually we achieve prajna, wisdom. And so we, even you could say at the embryonic level that we are at, then we're still combating these deep-rooted patterns. Absolutely. We're presently not doing it at the level of the path of seeing, the level of meditation, or I should say, at least I'm not. But nevertheless, the challenges are the same, but here we apply the path more in terms of lifestyle, in terms of just applying the teachings that we receive from our teacher, and simply just, we could say, every aspect of the path, whatever we're doing, will be combating these. So we can simply rest assured that if we want to get to the bottom of these habitual patterns, destructive patterns, and so on, we simply just need to follow the path. So that's describing the qualities of the Buddha, and we've covered then the qualities of elimination. Now we're going to describe the other quality, which is the Buddha's realization. I would like to say, please keep in mind, this is what we're doing on the path. We are generating the two qualities that we're talking about here in terms of elimination and realization. Again, this is because what we're doing is uncovering what has always been there, and it simply is about realizing what was always there, but also understanding how prior to seeing what is there needs to be an elimination of what obscures us. So now the qualities of a Buddha's realization. In addition to the qualities of elimination, Buddhas possess qualities arising from their realization. These are the 5 kinds of I, powers of vision, which are the fully ripened effective positive actions. The 6 kinds of preternatural knowledge accomplished through concentration, such as the knowledge and ability to perform wonders. and the 10 powers owing to which no intended action is impeded, as in the case of the power of the Buddha over their own lifespan. So that's where we say the Buddha only passes away in order to sort of make us wake up. Buddhas also possess the 4 dharanis, all of which are grounded in extraordinary memory and supreme intelligence. So sometimes we refer to dharani as a mantra, but here we actually refer to incredible mental capacity, and that includes incredible memory, incredible focus, and so forth. The second is the mantric dharani, accomplished through concentration and wisdom. The third is the word dharani, which is the ability to hold in unforgetting memory every word of the doctrine. The fourth is the meaning dharani, which is the power to remember infallibly the sense of all the teachings. Buddha have 10 strengths, defined as an unobstructed cognition of all objects of knowledge, such as the strength of knowing the different aspirations of beings. They have the 4 fearlessnesses in the face of all opposition to the assertions they make about themselves and others, and 4 perfect knowledges of all the ways of helping beings. Buddhas possess 18 distinctive qualities that are not shared by the Shravakas and Arhats. 6 of these refer to the way Buddhas behave. 1, their physical conduct is without delusion. 2, their voices are not strident or inconsiderate. 3, their mindfulness is unimpaired and seamless. 4, their minds are always in meditative equipoise. 5, they do not impose discriminations on their perceptions. 6, their equanimity nevertheless involves full discernment. In the same sequence, there now follows 6 distinctive qualities of a Buddha's realization. 7 Buddhas have a constant joyful keenness to act for the sake of beings. 8, they possess a mindfulness that never turns from the welfare of others. 9, they are tireless in endeavor. 10, they have a supreme knowledge of all phenomena. 11, one-pointed concentration. 12, and complete freedom from the 2 kinds of obscurations and habitual tendencies, together with a realization of omniscient wisdom. Then there are 3 qualities comprising the 3 distinctive aspects of primordial wisdom, whereby Buddhas embrace all objects of knowledge without impediment, due to the fact that the cognitive veils have been removed, and without attachment because the emotional veils are also eliminated. 13 in the past, 14 in the present, and 15 in the future. Finally, the 3 distinctive qualities of the Buddha's activities of 16 body, 17 speech and mind, and 18 mind proceed from and are accompanied by wisdom. This means that the wisdom is the driving force of the entire range of a Buddha's activity. Taken all together, these are the 18 qualities particular to a Buddha. They are not shared by Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, or Arhats. It is said in the 70 stanzas on refuge. Awakening from the sleep of ignorance, his mind made vast through primal wisdom, the Buddha is a lotus fully opened. So also this is where we very often see the definition, the etymology of Buddha, meaning someone who has eliminated and someone who has become completely flourishes like a lotus fully opened. So that's awakening from the sleep of ignorance is the elimination aspect, and the fully blossoming of all the qualities is like the lotus. The Buddha is Dharmakaya, primordial wisdom expressed in 21 perfect qualities, supreme over all, the expanse of purity and equality in a single taste. So that's where the Buddha sees all phenomena and yet does not see this in terms of duality and impure projection. That's where we talk about the Buddha perceiving everything in terms of its primordial purity. And that's also what we engage with when we practice development stage practice. That's where we, even though we don't see the purity, the reality of phenomena, we still visualize it. So the expanse of purity is how the Buddha sees relative truth, and the equality is the absence of any kind of dualistic construction, and as such no you could say struggle with reality, and as such no difference between samsara and nirvana. That's why we refer to it as equality. Kangyur Rinpoche writes, for the retinue of bodhisattvas on the 10th ground, a Buddha manifests as the Sambhogakaya, the appearance aspect of the ground nature, an empty form endowed with the 5 certainties. So that's where someone who is no longer confused does not see the Buddha just as, you could say, an ordinary person, but sees simply all the qualities that arise from the unobscured ground, the realization of the unobscured ground, the Dhammakaya, is manifest. And that's what we refer to as the Sambhogakaya. In the perception of ordinary beings, however, Buddha manifests as the Nirmanakaya, the teacher. And that's again where in our obscured condition, we perceive the awakened one with the projections according to our particular karmic disposition. So the Buddha will appear in various ways in the 6 different realms, but all of that will be all of these manifestations will be the Nirmanakaya, or the form manifestation. So that's the qualities of the Buddha. Let's see here. Okay. The qualities of the Dharma. So that's where we're now going to be looking. We've covered we are presently talking about why should we generate faith in the refuge? And that's where we're looking at the qualities of the refuge, the first being the Buddha, the jewel of the Buddha. The second jewel is then the Dharma. We'll look at that now. I'm curious about Buddha's driving force of wisdom. Yes, that's what we are presently discussing, and it's on the basis of understanding how this force of wisdom manifests that we then are discussing what this force of wisdom has brought about. And it has brought about the elimination of confusion, and it has brought about the flourishing of the enlightened qualities. So we've here in this chapter, we've looked at how how wisdom, the Buddha's wisdom, eliminates the aspects of confusion, and how the wisdom brings forth all the qualities of realization. So now we look at the qualities of the Dharma. Dharma posited as the two truths of path and cessation. So we have two truths. One is the truth as we understand it in terms of being a sentient being, and also the truth of reality as it's perceived, or rather when there's no obscuration. So we talk about relative and absolute truth. So that's where this is then here explained in terms of the path and the cessation. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, the term Dharma covers 3 areas. First, it signifies virtuous action or skillful means such as generosity. Second, it signifies the path, which in turn refers to the wisdom of realizing the absence of self. Third, it signifies nirvana, the freedom from obscurations that results from following the path. All these are the subject matter of the Dharma of transmission. But the nature of Dharma is twofold. On the one hand, it is the supreme resultant state, free from all stains. On the other, it is the very activity that eliminates these stains. So one is coming from, you could say, coming from above. The nature of Dharma is how things are, from the point of view of how they exist in absolute truth, how phenomena actually are. But it's also the remedy that enables us to achieve the insight into how phenomena are. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, these two aspects of Dharma correspond to the two truths of perfect purity, namely the truth of cessation and the truth of the path. So one is the Dharma of things as the Dharma of reality, and the other is the Dharma of the path, which is the remedy that enables us to experience reality. So that's where we, on one hand, have the aspect of accumulation of wisdom, of seeing, and then there's also the accumulation of of merit. So that's why it says, while meritorious actions is the auxiliary to the path. Is primal or primordial truth a basic absence? Ah, that's a good question. In other words, does it connote the appearance yet emptiness of everything? In Western culture, the term primordial implies something timeless, ancient. But in this case, I'm guessing it is an ever-present truth, free from constraints of time. Very good. That's it. And that's where, when we talk about primordial wisdom, we actually, the Tibetan term is Yene Shepa, Yeshe. And that means something that has always been there, but is basic to what is. So that's where that which is originally there. And that's where we're not, this doesn't fall into being, you could say, the appearance or the emptiness, because even the appearances are known as unborn, they're uncreated. They have actually never attained the identity that we allocate or impute on them. And that's where we say appearance and emptiness are absolutely inseparable. So there's no allegiance for this primordial conditions, there's no allegiance to appearance or to emptiness. It's simply just the state of reality as it is right now, beyond time. I hope that makes sense. What is to accumulate wisdom in action? Well, we could say what brings about wisdom initially is the accumulation of merit. So for us to realize wisdom, we need to begin with the accumulation of merit. Then Dharma defined as the Dharma of transmission and realization. So this is now where we're looking at. So one way of understanding the Dharma as one, the truth of things as they are, and also understanding Dharma as the path that brings us to the truth. Now we also look at what is important, the Dharma transmission, you could say the theory, the heritage of Buddhism, and then the realization, that awakened condition that occurs when there's no longer obscurations and when there's realization. And that's where we then talk about this as embodied in individuals that have realization. So you can say one is a theoretical component in terms of a heritage of information. The other is the qualities of awakening that's present within a sublime individual that has realization. Let's see how it's explained here, though. So the Dharma of transmission and realization may be discussed in terms of the three collections of the teachings, or Tripitaka, and the three trainings set forth therein. Okay, the scriptures, the Tripitaka, the Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma, and the three trainings, which is then the application of these, which is then again the training of discipline, the training of meditation, and the training of wisdom, Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. All right, I think we'll stop here, partly because now there's a reference to a stanza, and the practicalities of that might be a bit more than I can technically oversee right now. So let's just leave it at that. So I will highlight this section of the Buddha's qualities as requested in the Treasure of Blessings when reciting the mantra. Good to have them so well explained. Thank you so much, because thank you. I need a little bit of encouragement, because I do feel that I'm doing a rather poor job in presenting this, essentially just reading the material. But yes, and that is true. Mipa Rinpoche in this, in the Treasure of Blessings, very much speaks about the highlighting the qualities and the value of reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha. So please, very good, thank you. All right, I'm just going to recite the dedication prayer here at the end, very briefly. Oops, there was one more question or comment. Oh yes, Om Ahong, Om Ahong, Om Ahong. Yes, indeed. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, ever more and more. Thank you very much. Very happy to be back and studying this. So, thank you. Thank you, the real number one. Okay. See you next week. Thank you.